For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host, Jade Black, and following on somewhat from the most British episode so far with tea, I'm now talking about food. I say that as if that's going to go up in quick succession, like straight after one another, but it's probably not. We'll see. So in terms of food today, I'm talking about food in world, so that's popular food, cultural significance, what stuff generally doesn't go down so well, also notable food related moments, character preferences, all of those sorts of things. So without further ado, I guess let's just jump on into it. And let's start with cultural significance of food, because it is a big deal in that world. It is very much a way it's a way that a lot of people bond. It's something that people, going for meals and getting takeout is a thing people do to treat themselves. Recreation, it's pretty similar as to what we're familiar with. Well done me. What amazing phrasing that is. Yeah, cultural significance, it is, I think it often carries a little bit more meaning than necessarily you or I in the UK am used to. I don't know the exact meaning of food in certain other cultures, but food often carries a lot of weight, especially if people cook for you. It can be a polite thing, but it can also be a real sign of love, depending on exactly what they're making, how they make it, and all those sorts of things. I think that's particularly prevalent in UK, but also Malasar and Cana. Those are the big three that come to mind for me with that. And I want to talk a bit, this is kind of left field, about the great pizza debate. Because oh boy, does this get heated. And I'm not talking about pineapple on pizza explicitly. What I'm talking about is what qualifies as real pizza. Because this can be thorny. There are two main types of pizza. So there's Americhan pizza and there's also Malasan pizza. And oh boy, they are not the same thing. So Americhan pizza is what we would think of as just, thin crust Italian pizza. And, people, margarita is a thing. People will put eggs on for Fiorentina and stuff like that. Malasan pizza, however, is more of what we'd think of as Brazilian style pizza, but not quite. So it's deep dish. Sometimes it has a stuffed crust, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a deep dish pizza filled with just more cheese than anybody except I Nagashima could possibly eat. More on I and his cheese in a minute. But it's full of cheese, full of tomatoes. There's often quite a lot of meat and mushroom. A lot of people would describe Malasan pizza kind of as a heart attack on a plate because it's that much cheese, but Americhans and Malasans don't talk about pizzas together because it's very much, if you're Americhan, Malasan pizza is not pizza. And if you're Malasan, Americhan pizza is not pizza. It's a laughingstock, it's pathetic. And one little world-building story I do want to mention is the half Malasan, half Americhan chef who decided to put pineapple on pizza. And this happened in Americi. I don't know which style of pizza it was, presumably thin crust. But let's just say there was an exile involved. At least one. There might have been more. I don't know. But yes, pineapple on pizza is a thing. It's definitely more of a thing in Malasa. Some people do actually do that because pineapple is somewhat of a delicacy in Malasa. So, yeah. So let's talk a bit about popular food, because pizza is obviously popular. American food in general is pizza, pasta, American desserts as well, so things like tiramisu, that all goes down pretty well pretty much everywhere. Pasta is just, it's delicious. A lot of people accept that. A lot of people make their own versions of pasta as well, so it's actually quite easy to get hold of, even somewhere like UK. It's not hard to get hold of pasta, and then people will put their own sort of UK's twist on it, and it's quite interesting. Canaan food is also very popular, and very much so in the south, but it's and in Hiraeth. Canaan food is huge in Hiraeth, but it's gaining a lot of popularity in UK as well, and that's sort of what we would think of as Indian curries. That's like Bombay aloo and Sag paneer and all that sort of stuff. Matar paneer as well, that's a good one. That's really quite big now. That's one of Hanzo's favourites, but again, we'll come back to character preferences with food in a minute. Unpopular food, there's quite a lot of that. So Herithian food, maybe not surprising, isn't very popular. It's a lot of potatoes and sausages and stodge and blood and just... It's a very heavy to a lot of people, and yes, beans on toast does exist, and some people find it weird, some people don't. That one's a bit of a Marmite food, so to speak. Don't know how British that expression is, but we'll see, I guess. But yeah, Herithian food doesn't generally go down too well. South Fjordovan food doesn't really either, for pretty similar reasons. South Fjordovan food is very, very meat heavy. There's also a lot of dill, which a lot of people don't like, me included. I'm not a fan of dill at all. And they do have brown cheese, and as is true of our world, many people think brown cheese is a bit weird. Although you can get it elsewhere if you wanted to. Some people do buy it. It's not impossible to find. A slightly odd shout for unpopular food is Lieren. Now, I do want to go into a little bit of detail about Lieren food, because Liera is a really big landmass, and the sort of north of the continent, north of Liera, is very much sort of, yeah, quite similar to Hiraeth really. A lot of sausage and potatoes and pastry, quite a lot of pastry, so things like stroganoff. That's not pastry, is it? But whatever. There are some kinds of like stuffed breads and things like that as well, and that often doesn't go down well, again, just because of the stodge thing, if nothing else. Whereas in southern Liera, it's a lot warmer there. It's sort of Mediterranean, some places maybe bordering a little bit on tropical, but hard to say without actually having the map in front of me, which I don't. And a lot of the southern Lieren food is just very rich. A lot of butter, a lot of eggs, a lot of cream, a lot of stuff like that. And it's somewhat polarizing, but generally people don't like it because it's too rich. It's just too much for a lot of people to be able to palate and eat. It doesn't go down that well. I mean, particularly Lieren desserts, people basically see that as American dessert, but just with an extra packet of butter, and also often just like 6 eggs for no reason. And I don't know if you've ever eaten, a lemon tart with 6 eggs and not enough lemon in it, but it's not nice, because you don't actually taste the lemon. All you actually taste is the egg. You need a lot of lemon to counteract that, and to be honest, you don't need all that egg to begin with. If you want to unsub if you are French, I understand. I'm a Brit, so you're probably not subbed anyway. I really went there. But let's move on a little bit to restaurants and takeaways, because restaurants are huge business, just about everywhere. Maybe not South York so much, but they're pretty big everywhere else. And generally with restaurants, you're going to find restaurants for local cuisine. It's pretty rare you'll find sort of foreign food in a restaurant, unless it's like a couple of dishes here and there, although that is becoming a little bit... There is a bit more of that coming. So in somewhere like UK, most of the restaurants will be, either just, broad spread of UK's food. Some of them will specialise into sushi or just ramen or things like that. But you will also get Korean Jongan restaurants, you do see a fair few of those in Hyukai, particularly in the capital, and vice versa is true. So in Quyeonjong you do get Hyukai's restaurants too. But for example, in Hyukai, you're not going to see a Hyrillian restaurant. Like, that's just not going to happen. But you might see a takeaway for that. Generally, that's where the foreign food will be. So in Hyukai in particular, there are quite a lot of pizza takeout places. American restaurants, I suspect there might be one or two, or there will be at least people thinking of setting that up because it is quite popular there. Just I think because it's very different as much as anything, but it's definitely not a major part of the restaurant sector. Curry houses, I suspect there are a few of those dotted around, but just because people like curry. But all of those things are generally takeaway rather than sit-in restaurant. I imagine somewhere like Malasau is a little bit different for that, at least later on in the timeline, because it is that bit more diverse. And you would say the same about Lihera, but Lihera is kind of a weird place, so I'm not really sure on that one, because they do have a lot of... There is quite a big Hyukai's population, though not as big as it ought to be, so I imagine you might get the odd sort of sushi bar type place, but not like a full-on restaurant, necessarily. I do imagine that Malasau has a good couple of curry houses and a couple of Quyeonjong places, because Quyeonjong and Malasau do border each other, so I suspect that's where most of the restaurants come from. Is if the nation borders, then the food's not necessarily that different, so it can come in, and then that paves the way as well, because Quyeonjong food and Hyukai's food, there are common threads there. So that's the way it will eventually go, but they're just not quite there yet, is the deal. So let's talk about character preferences with food, because I have touched on this a little bit already. We're going to start with Haru, because he is semi-vegetarian, and this does happen a bit later on in Mr. Nakagami, well, not that late, but because he does struggle with his weight a little bit. So his rationale is basically, if I don't eat lots of meat, if I need to comfort eat and I'm just comfort eating vegetables, then, that will just turn into water, it doesn't really matter. Whereas, if you're comfort eating lots of red meat, then you're just going to pile on weight. So he just cuts out meat completely, eventually. Fish he does still eat from time to time, but he just likes his tofu. So that's kind of his deal. I did touch on this earlier with I and his cheese, and this is something that really blindsided me in Black Executioner, just that I loved cheese. Which is pretty unusual for a Yuki's man, I would think. But he does. He absolutely loves cheese, especially if it's like melty cheese. He likes that. I mean, halloumi is probably his favourite cheese. He does talk about it a fair bit. There is a line I've posted from Black Executioner a few times for One Line Wednesday over the years that's I've never seen anybody stare at cheese like that in my life. Which is something that one of I's friends says to him, because nachos are brought over to their table when they're in I don't think it has a name, that's why it's not coming up, but there's a little cafe that I frequents and they bring over nachos and he's like, look at the melty cheese. It's just one of those really weird things. One of my friends did coin, you may fascinate a war hero by giving him a piece of cheese, and now I kind of want to draw that. I'm not quite sure what it would look like, whether it would just be like really dumb cartoony or not, but I think I might have to do that sometime. And we're going to go next to Hanzo and his curry, because Hanzo is not a great cook. Like, he can do eggs on toast, omelette, and a bit of ramen and stuff like that, but he's not great at it. I don't know that he necessarily enjoys cooking all that much. So Hanzo is a bit more... He's at the takeout places maybe a little bit more than he should be. I mean, part of that is he works very, very long hours, so we'll let him off a bit for that. So Hanzo does like his pizza. He does get takeout pizza a few times on page in Snakebite. Big fan of cheese. Again, he likes his cheese. But Hanzo's favourite food, by absolutely, like, it's not even close, is curry. He absolutely loves his curry, be that Hyuki's style curry or Kanan curry. Probably Kanan curry he has a preference for, but that's the first thing he does after the war ends is he goes to get himself a takeout curry and a couple of beers to like just so he can just have a quiet moment with his food and enjoy himself. And then ends up sort of thinking about the meaning of life a bit, because of course he does, and then he's like, no, I'm not having this thought process before, a couple more beers. And probably a cigarette, knowing Hanzo, but that's Hanzo for you. Now, Koni is also Koni's kind of the anti-Haru here, because Koni was brought up as a hunter. His dad was a hunter. He ran his own sort of hunting business, I do believe. And Koni basically ended up kind of working for him in his younger years, kind of before it was legal for him to work. But, it's in the neutral zone, so nobody can argue, because there's, like, no law out there. Yeah, Koni's dad was great. But Koni does, despite that, enjoy hunting, and for a long time when he wasn't earning that much, he would hunt and forage for his food to save money, basically. And he's very, very good at hunting. He does have a big taste for meat, that is his thing. This does happen on page with Pensman a couple of times, I think, when he wants to make a snack for himself, he'll often just like, okay, I've got some like small pieces of meat, I'll just like fry those up and eat them. He does like his noodles and his veg too. I don't think he's a huge rice guy, which is a bit odd, to be honest, but meat is definitely his go-to thing. He has a particular thing for lamb and mutton, for what it's worth. He's not a huge fan of pork anymore, because he had to eat it like every day for like a month straight or something, and he's kind of off it for life at this point. It's also a really terrible thing for him to eat with his health, but And lastly, we're going to go on to Shinichi, who is the carb champion. There's always one. The man would live off rice if he could. He loves his rice porridge and his anything with rice. He'll happily scarf that. I don't know if he feels the same about potatoes and other carbs, but I mean, he probably does. In terms of like meat and fish and all that, I suspect he probably leans more towards fish than meat, but he just wants rice. He just wants his carbs. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it is. He's definitely a double, triple carb kind of guy. I mean, if rice sandwich, he's probably done it. He probably does have a thing for bread too, thinking about it. I did touch on this a little bit earlier as well, with characters who cook. Haru loves his cooking. He does like to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. It's kind of a de-stress thing for him, but it's also he's not a massively artistic kind of a guy. He's not a guy who's going to like paint or sculpt or draw anything. He doesn't have that. But cooking and all of that is something he can do that's quite artistic. And I think he does get a lot out of that. But he just really enjoys food as well. He's probably a bit more of a baker than a savoury thing. I know he spends years trying to perfect his shortbread recipe. That is something that comes up on page in Mr. Nakagami. His shortbread does appear on page in Black Executioner as well, but not with the same amount of detail. But he does take he likes doing tempura as well. His tempura is apparently very, very good. That's what Nagashima tells me, but we're going to move away from that before we get into spoiler territory. Koni does also get quite a lot out of cooking. He has a bit more artistic tendency than Haru, but I think there is a bit of the de-stress thing there as well. I think he just, as much as anything, he quite likes hearing a pan sizzle. I think he quite likes that noise and the sort of the satisfaction of things changing colour in the pan, and I don't know, the little things. I think it is for Coney as much as anything. It's not with Haru. It's not about with him. Let's try that again. With Haru, he likes to feed himself and feed other people. He's very much that guy who will cook too much food to say he loves you. Coney doesn't have that in the same way. It's just that I think he just enjoys the process more than anything. Let's talk about a few notable food moments though, and this almost immediately undermines what I just said about Coney, because he does cook for Curtis in Penstemon one time. He makes him ramen one time when Curtis comes over for dinner after doing a trade talk with Yukai, and it's all a bit tense because of things that have happened just before, and I can't say much about this without spoilers. It's not overly romantic between them, it's just a very normal moment, which neither of them really get much of, and I think that's almost what makes it stand out. At least to me. Another notable food moment is I and Daneth. Well, actually, there are a couple with them, because they do take a lunch together at one point on page in Black Executioner after I does something that he... I don't know how much I can say about this, but it's controversial. Can say that much at the very least, and Daneth kind of wants to talk to him about it, and about a couple of rumours that are circulating about the two of them. And yeah, what's interesting about that scene to me is that it's that same cafe I mentioned vaguely earlier. That's where they are for that, and they're sort of running low on food, so Daneth orders for him, because he wants I to actually be able to eat. And they're both kind of awkward about that, like uncomfortable type awkward, but Daneth manages to choose exactly the sort of thing that I would want to eat. Despite them not having spent all that much time together, and I think that says quite a lot about who Daneth is as a person, as much as anything. And obviously I and Haru, last but not least, do have their notable food moments as well. They do eat together a good few times. Haru does cook for I a few times on page as well. One that springs to mind with them is during the Slay war crime trials. They have dinner together, like in their hotel room. I think it's Kung Pao they're eating, which is delicious, by the way, and highly recommend it. And they're talking about a particular juror who neither of them are very happy about being there, but they can't really challenge it because of how things work, and it's all a bit uncomfortable. But I think that's probably about all I have to say on this one for the moment. So let's move on to the interview plug. If you are published or on the way, please do get in touch. Email is the way to do that. There are still legacy episodes going up that say you can contact me via Twitter. I'd prefer for you not to do that. Email is my preference, jade42black@gmail.com. There is a list of stuff in the description I would like to know first. Please include that so that if and when I get inundated, I don't have to give you an automatic no, because nobody wants that. Things worth bearing in mind, doesn't have to be a novel, could be an overview of a trilogy or something like that. We can talk about being creative with it. It doesn't have to be adult either. It doesn't have to be... what was I going to say? I mean, it can be poetry, anthologies, short story collections, whatever. I'm open to talking about all sorts of things. I want to hear about different people's different forms of creativity. Doesn't need to be a certain genre. Just bring it in and we can have a really interesting conversation about something that I wouldn't usually pick up as much as anything. I think that would be really cool. If you're looking to find me, moi, elsewhere, that's not too difficult to do. I've got pretty much the same handle across anything. If you're looking for the podcast home, which you probably are, that is on Instagram. I am Jade_Black21 on there. You'll find early release sort of teasers of what the episode is going to be. You'll also find teaser reels and stuff like that. Potentially other things in the future as and when I think of them. If you're looking for more about my writing, the sort of writing home, that is Twitter, JadeBlack21. If you're looking for more of the art side of things, that is Blue Sky, JadeBlack21. For what it's worth, I have forgotten to say this in a couple of episodes, any big announcements will go across all of those platforms. If it's really big, I might also do a YouTube video on it, but don't quote me on that. So, if there's any big news, you're not going to miss it by only following me on one place. But for now, I think that is about it, so you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so you don't miss future content. Copyright Jade Black 2023.